In today's class, we are going to start Unit 4. Okay, Unit 4 is Object-Oriented Concepts used in Python. So, in the past 3 units, we have discussed the introductions, IDEs, and all the basic syntaxes, right? So, everything we have finished, and function concepts, all the basic syntaxes we have covered in the past 3 units. Okay. So in Unit 4, we are going to discuss about OOPS concepts which is used in Python. Okay, so first let us just discuss the classification of procedure-oriented programming and object-oriented programming. Okay, so the expansion for POP is procedure-oriented programming and the expansion for OOP is object-oriented programming. Okay, so since already you have studied C language during your last semester, we'll just compare, okay, because you have studied C programming language is a procedure oriented programming language, right? So in that introduction itself, I have given you what is meant by procedure oriented and object oriented programming. Okay, so your C programming language comes under procedure oriented programming. And in this semester, you are studying about Python and it is a object oriented programming language. So before entering into the OOPS concepts of Python, we will just have the clarity of what is the difference we have between procedure oriented and object oriented programming. Okay, so these are the major classifications between POP and OOPS. Okay, so the first classification, we are just classifying based on the division. So how we are going to divide the program. Okay, so if you see procedure oriented programming, here the program is divided into small parts called as functions. Okay, so here the program is divided into small parts called functions because we know that in procedure oriented programming, everything whatever we are going to we are going to design the program, the entire program will come under the main function, right? And if you want to create any modules, then you will be going for some sub functions, right? So there the program will be divided into small parts by using the functions. Okay, the same way if you see object oriented programming, here the program is divided into small parts called as objects. Okay, the entire program will be divided into different modules and each and every module we are just going to call them as they are the objects. Okay, so this is how we are going to divide the programs in procedure oriented and object oriented programming. So in procedure oriented programming, the program will be divided in the form of functions, whereas in OOPS it is divided into objects. Okay. Then the second one is the importance. Okay, so in procedure oriented programming, for which particular component we are going to give more importance. So importance is given to the functions and sequence of action. Okay, so in procedure oriented programming, more preference will be given to the functions and the sequence of the operations. So if you see the object oriented programming, here the importance is given to the data. Okay, so rather than the procedure, more preference will be given to the data with which we are going to work. Okay, so your object oriented programming will completely rely on the data with which it is just executing the task. Okay, so in procedure oriented programming, only based on the procedure and based on the functions whatever we have created, the more preference will be given for such things. Okay, then the third classification is with respect to the approach. Okay, so in procedure oriented programming, it follows top down approach. Your object oriented programming follows bottom up approach. So what is mean by top down and bottom up approach? Okay, if you take a C programming language, since you have studied C language during your last semester, I'm just taking C as the comparison here. Okay, so if you take the C programming language, where if you start the program, okay, with your header file, followed by that you will be having the main program, right? So all the programs will begin with using the main function. Okay, so since the main function comes in the beginning of the program, your program execution starts from the topmost line, right, which is the main function. So hence we are calling this procedure oriented programming follows top down approach. And if you take object oriented programming, here each and every parts in your program will be defined from the beginning, okay, and at the bottom we used to call the objects or functions whatever we have in the top, okay. So the entire program will be divided into small parts called objects, okay, and these objects are nothing but the classes, okay. So here the modules will be splitted in the form of classes, right? So and all the class definition parts will be finished in the top lines. Then from bottom we will be accessing the classes with the help of objects, okay. By creating the objects we will be accessing the functions and data which we have defined in the top line, right? So hence we are saying this particular object oriented programming as a bottom up approach, okay. Then you just see the fourth difference. So it is access specifier. Okay, so we have another terminology called access specifier, and this particular terminology we didn't used in procedure oriented programming, right? So your POP does not have any access specifier. So we don't have any such concepts in C language, right? So if you see this object oriented programming, it has three access specifiers in general. Okay, so we are not relating with Python, but in general, your object oriented programming are having three access specifiers. They are public, private, and protected. Okay, so these are the three access specifiers. I'll tell you what is mean by this access specifier. Okay, because how the data and functions can be accessed, that will be decided only based on the access specifier. So in the later classes I'll explain you what is this access specifier. Okay, then the fifth classification is data movement. Okay, so in procedure oriented programming, data can move freely from function to function. So from one function to another function we can just have the data sharing, right? So data can be transferred among the functions, whereas if you see this object oriented programming, data can move and communicate using member functions, okay. So because the data is separate and your function created for each and every class will be separate, okay. So hence here the data can be moved, or it can be communicated through the member functions only, okay. And apart from that we have access specifiers also, right? So based on all those criteria only the data can be transferred, right? Then the last classification is with respect to examples. Okay, so what are the languages which comes under procedure oriented programming? So C language and Visual Basics and Fortran. So these are the programming languages which comes under procedure oriented programming. And if you see object oriented programming, Python, C++, Java, they are all object oriented programming. Okay, so what is the apart from all these classifications, what is the major difference we have? See, if it is a procedure oriented programming, it has some structure, okay. In C language, I hope you would have studied the structure of the C programming language, right? Your C programming language follows certain structure. It starts with the documentation section, link section, okay, and then main function, variable declaration. Like this, you will be having certain structure. So all your program should begin with the link section. Am I right? So link section comprises of your header files. So obviously all the C program will have the header file. Then it will start with the main function. Within that you will be having variable declaration, and then whatever operations we are going to do, then it may have so many sub functions, right? So this structure needs to be followed with all the procedure oriented programming. So hence it has certain procedure to follow. We are calling them as procedure oriented programming, okay. Whereas if you see this object oriented programming, here there is no structure like your procedure oriented programming, okay. And each and every data and function which is present in the program can be accessed through the objects, okay. Here object plays a major role, vital role Hence, we are calling this as object-oriented programming language.